Hey folks, welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at inking this Rod Serling illustration that I started in the last video. If you haven't had a chance to watch that yet, go back and watch it. And I share my process in terms of how I approach drawing a portrait and study. So this video starts us off with me making some adjustments to Rod Serling's head. I noticed that in the original reference photo, his head has a slight tilt. And so I just used the lasso tool here to slightly rotate the head to better match the reference. I work in red when I pencil digitally, only because it makes it easier for me when I'm actually inking. And I like to drop the opacity of my pencils layer to about 30%. In terms of where I typically start, it really depends upon what I'm inking. In this particular case, of course, I'm starting with the eyes. That's usually the most challenging part of any portrait. You got to get the eyes looking right. If they don't look right, then the whole thing kind of gets thrown off. When I do ink, I do try to keep in mind a few important concepts. I want to make sure that I can convey texture through my inks, and by that I'd like to use hatching, or I like to use repetition of shapes and patterns so that there's a sense of texture. You can see that the eyebrows here have a little bit of that sense of like hair, right? So I also like to incorporate line variation. So I'll use thicker lines and bring them closer together when I want to convey something really dense, like you'll see in the video later on when I ink the hair. I also like to add some black fills, which are those areas in the composition that are just simply black. They're usually in some type of a shape. It's distinguished from the lines that you would normally see. And I usually think that, my inks look better when it has those elements in there. Now, speaking of the Twilight Zone, I just thought I'd go ahead and compile some of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. And when I say favorites, these are the ones that I watch over and over again. And I'm referring to the classic 1959 series. So in no particular order, I'll share mine. And if you wouldn't mind, if you're a Twilight Zone fan, if you can give me your top 3 Twilight Zone episodes in the comments below. Just want to see how your choices match up with mine. So again, in no particular order, Death's Head Revisited, Living Doll, Walking Distance, To Serve Man, The Masks, Eye of the Beholder, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Time Enough at Last, 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, and I think that was 10. So there's probably 1 or 2 more in there that I think would qualify as being, there's one particular episode where this guy makes a bet about staying silent for a year. I forgot the name of that episode, but that one's also one of my favorites too. So that being said, here I am working on the teeth and the mouth. And when I'm drawing a representation of a person that's recognizable as a celebrity, I think with teeth, you have to look at the overall shape of the teeth. You don't have to draw every single tooth unless there's a lot of gaps between the teeth. In this case, I wanted to just kind of add those lines in for the teeth that are a little bit further away. So now I'm working on the hair. And again, I'm thinking about the movement of the hair. Our hair has a specific formation. Everyone's hair either grows, you either have a parting or you have your hair kind of without a part. In this particular case, I noticed that in this hairstyle that Rod Serling is sporting, he's got, more of a slick back look on the sides with a little bit of that poofiness on the top. And one of the things I would say about hair is think about not only the shape of the hair, but think about how the individual strands kind of work collectively. You don't have to get it 100% accurate, but you just have to convey the idea that, oh, this is curly hair, or this is hair that's straight. I think my favorite part of the whole process, and I may have mentioned this in a few other videos, so if you've been watching these for quite some time, you'll probably know that inking is one of my favorite parts of the illustration process, because at that point, a lot of the heavy thinking in terms of conceptualizing the work has been complete. So typically this is more of a mode where I kind of go in autopilot. I will listen to music, or I'll have now YouTube. I'll typically have a YouTube video running when I'm working in this particular phase, because I don't have to necessarily give 150% attention as I would when I'm conceptualizing what I'm creating. So here I'm using a thinner line weight for some of those hair strands that are a little bit further back. In the last video, I mentioned the importance of flipping your drawing horizontally so that you can avoid potential distortions in your characters. I'm right-handed, so when I draw, I tend to kind of favor my right hand. So if you look at the character's eyes, there's typically a little bit of a tilt, and I use the transform skew to adjust the tilt and fix the tilt to where the eyes look more level, they're more horizontal than, at an angle. And that was fixed in the penciling phase. Use a lot of really important keyboard shortcuts here, and some of them you'll see when my screen is a little bit more zoomed out. I don't use Command-Z a lot. I'm recording this audio as I'm watching a replay of the video. But I'm not ashamed to admit that I use Command-Z whenever I need to. There's no shame in doing that. But what I will say is, with inking, it's not just simply tracing the lines. I think good inking takes on a characteristic of its own. Inking, another way of describing inking is embellishment. And what that really is, it's a fancy $5 word that basically means you're adding to, you're actually making something greater than what the pencils were. And that's really the goal here. I ink with the same brush that I use for penciling, which may seem counterintuitive, but really does work for me. In some rare cases, I will actually just convert my pencils to inks depending upon how tight I'm working. In this particular case, I wanted to really spend a little bit more time with the inking aspect of it and actually making some refinements, which is why I kept inking as a separate stage. So here's where I'm adding some of those details for the teeth, just kind of implying the fact that the teeth are actually moving away from the viewer. I also like to add shading when I ink. So looking at the left side of Rod Serling's face in the reference photo, and you can see that there is a darker tone around those areas. And I think inking can help us represent a form that shows that there's a volume. Right now, the volume isn't quite there yet. Yes, you can see that there are eyes, nose, and a mouth, but adding those shading elements will really hopefully give the head a little bit more contour. Details come at the very end. I really don't spend too much time at the beginning worrying about details, especially when I ink. One thing you'll notice, and you'll see this with the final reveal, when I put my pencils side by side with my inked work, I start to, I want the eyes to have a reflective quality, and I want it to look a little bit more convincing than just flat black eyes, which is what the reference photo seems to imply. But I'm illustrating this, and again, I'm not making a one-to-one copy of the photo. I'm using it and just trying to capture the likeness. So this is something else that I also do too when I create my shading, I'll actually draw a line to kind of give myself a kind of a border to work to, and then I will just use the lasso tool and trim that border out. I suppose I could put that on its own separate layer and just get rid of it or delete it, but sometimes I'll do that, sometimes I'll do it this way. This video is being recorded in real time. It took me about a little over 15 minutes to record the whole thing. I wasn't intentionally working fast. This is just pretty much how I work. One of the reasons why I add the audio after doing a video like this one is because I find it distracting when I'm talking as I'm working. I want to give myself more focus. So that's why I record audio after the video component has already been complete. The overall vision in part 3 of this, I will add a few more compositional elements, and I'll actually start to arrange a magazine layout. I've got some Photoshop templates that correspond to the overall dimensions of a magazine, and that's what I'm going to use when I bring this particular image in. I will also draw a few additional Twilight Zone characters. Maybe some of those characters might be from some of the episodes that you're already familiar with, and some of them might just be things that I just want to draw. I think the Twilight Zone is certainly representative of those classic episodes, but anything that's kind of weird or mysterious or bizarre tends to fall into that category. So here I'm just, zooming in and zooming out, kind of adding some more of the finishing touches, if you will. For these hatch lines, I typically will make the brush size significantly smaller. I use the left bracket key to reduce the size of the brush. I use the right bracket key to increase the size of the brush. I think it's really important to have a good grasp of some of the basic Photoshop keyboard shortcuts so that you can stay in your flow state while you're working. It's amazing how much the shading kind of gives some dimension and form to the face. I'm not going super crazy with it, but I am adding enough to where there is an understanding that there is a light source that is present. I don't want to overly shade because I think that can also make the drawing look a little bit too busy. And so the balance usually comes from when, I guess my stopping point is just kind of when I feel like the shading does enough of a job to convey form. And of course, that's completely subjective. I don't really have a specific, methodology to it. I just kind of look at it and see where I want to stop. So here I'm giving some contours and some shading around the lips to give that a little bit more form. If you have any specific Twilight Zone characters that you would like to see me draw for this forthcoming spoof cover magazine design, let me know in the comments below. I can't promise that I'll draw everything, but I will take a look at the lists and make some decisions. I do want to incorporate some of the classic characters. I have drawn some other Twilight Zone characters in the past. I might repurpose some of those. I know that I've drawn one of the Canamites. I've drawn some of the characters from the episode The Masks. So those may come back in, but I do want to draw some new things as well. I hope this process has been informative. I'm not sure how much value people get out of watching me ink, especially in real time, but if it does help, let me know. If you'd like to see more of this type of stuff, let me know. I want to make sure this content is interesting and is something that is going to be meaningful for you. I can provide more tips and techniques, and I certainly would like to do that, but I think there's something to be said to actually see, the work, right? To see the actual work so that you can understand where some of these tips and techniques are coming from. And maybe you might recognize some of the tips and techniques that I'm using within this drawing that I've already covered in previous videos. So we're almost wrapping up here. If you haven't considered subscribing, hopefully this video will encourage you to do so. There'll be a final reveal. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.